Stop playing with me.
This is Samu and I's project.
And we're gonna be presenting about Sheng versus U.S. Supreme Court case.
Up the smoke, dominate choke. Ice. My bro, I'm in the white, let me get into the poke.
The case between Sheng versus the United States was issued right after World War I. Therefore, the issue of national security was treated seriously by the U.S. government. For example, the Espionage Act was passed, which prohibits false reports or false treatments with intent to interfere with the success of the U.S. military forces. Also,
1919
was in the era of the first Red Scare, which was marked by a widespread fear of communism and anarchism. Therefore, America's attitude toward political issue was conservative and wanted stronger government power to regulate problems. Also, at that time, Edward D. White was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He was the son of a slave-holding sugar planter and enlisted in the Confederate Army. So consequently, he shared a conservative view while he worked for the court.
The Schwent versus United States case, in which the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on March 3, 1919, during the case of Schwent versus United States. Charles T. Schwent was General Secretary of the U.S. Socialist Party, which opposed the execution of a military draft in the country. The party printed and distributed some 15,000 leaflets. Schwent was arrested for violating the Espionage, whatever the bullshit is called, Act. He was convicted on 3 counts and was sentenced to 10 years in prison for each count. The Espionage Act provided a crime for any person to convey information, and that calls for men who were drafted to resist military service and to interfere with the U.S. Armed Forces prosecution of the war effort or to promote the success of the country's enemies. Arguments at the Supreme Court were heard on January 9, 1919. Schwent's counsel arguing that the freedom of speech is guaranteed by the First Amendment.
Sheng was accused because he spreaded 50,000 leaflets and he was violating the Espionage Act since he presented clear and present danger to the national security in the time of warfare. And in this case, the freedom of speech was violated when Sheng was convicted because even though this was a time of warfare, he still has a right according to the First Amendment. Okay, about the court ruling. The court
unanimous
opinion written by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes held that Sheng's criminal conviction was constitutional. Writing for the majority, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes stated that the question in every case is whether the words used are used in such circumstances and are of such a nature as to create a clear and present danger that they will bring about the substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent. It is a question of proximity and degree. Attempts made by speech or writing could be punished like other attempted crime. And the First Amendment did not protect speech encouraging man to resist induction because, quotation mark, when a nation is at war, many things that might be said in time of peace are such a hindrance to its effort that their utterance will not be endured so long as men fight, and that no court could regard them as protected by any constitutional right. In other words, the court held the circumstances of wartime allow greater restriction on free speech than would be allowed during peacetime, if only because new and greater dangers are present.
The Supreme Court established a long-living First Amendment precedent March 3, 1919. Schwent versus United States conceded the clear and present danger test for protected speech under the First Amendment.
The court ruled in Sheng versus United States 1919 that speech creating a clear and present danger is not protected under the First Amendment. This decision shows how the Supreme Court interpretation of the First Amendment sometimes sacrifices individual freedom in order to preserve social order. In Sheng versus United States, the Supreme Court prioritized the power of the federal government over an individual's right to freedom of speech.
The clear and present danger test established in Schwenk no longer applies today. Later cases, like New York Times Co. vs. United States, bolster freedom of speech and the press, even in cases concerning national security. Freedom of speech is not the absolute, however, the court has permitted time, place, and manner restrictions that may regulate when, where, and how individuals exercise free speech.
And this was Sunwoo,
It's Yusuf.
and this was Shang versus United States. Thank you for watching.
Peace out. The Schwem.
Espionage Act. Okay.
Could you see me from the tree?
Yeah.
Can you see me?
Your shoulders.
I don't know.
Okay. Coming back from Yusuf. Okay. Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe.
We're in present danger. Oh, long living First Amendment precedent. What the hell?